Hello everyone, my name is Mansour. I am an associate professor in the College of Nursing, Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal University in Saudi Arabia. Today I would like to present our research on the contribution of undergraduate nursing education in developing assertive communication skills among Saudi newly graduate nurses and qualitative findings. My colleagues who are actually working with me in this project is Dr. Maha Al-Madani, who is an assistant professor in the Fundamentals of Nursing Department, Mr. Abdurrahman Anati, who is a lecturer in the Community Health Nursing Department, and Mr. Aysar Jamama, who is a lecturer in Community Health Nursing Department. Now we know that non-technical skills such as communication, teamwork, and decision making are key cognitive and interpersonal skills that underpin effective teamwork. Communication failures such as inability to speak up against unsafe practice were said to be the leading causes of inadvertent patient harm. Now, speaking up itself has been defined as standing up for oneself in such a way as not to disregard other person's opinion. The newly graduate nurses may lack self-confidence in initial mobilization to their new role. The majority of nursing students may lack moral courage to speak up when they are actually exposed to poor practice. Yet they may still suffer from this ongoing moral distress when they don't have the courage and ability to speak up against unsafe practice, particularly if they actually see a very serious unsafe practice and they cannot challenge it or intercept it. In the context of the newly graduate nurses, this lack of confidence may be short-lived. Newly graduate nurses may increase their own confidence and knowledge as they practice more. Yet, they may face defensive response from new work environment and may still face the dilemma of how to translate such assertiveness into practice. What influence speaking up attitude among newly graduate nurses? Now, there are very few reasons which has been cited in the literature on what actually influence or shape the speaking up attitude among newly graduate nurses. First of all is theory-practice gap. What was deemed safe practice in university may often be contrasted with actual variation in actual clinical settings. Also, it was reported that knowledge and enhancement and clinical skills acquisitions are key strategies that we utilize by newly graduate nurses to build their self-confidence. And both nursing students and newly graduate nurses speaking of behavior and assertiveness are shaped by individual and contextual factors such as moral and ethical beliefs, willingness to and confidence to speak up, but also the support they have in their work setting from their manager and peers. We also have to mention about the legislation in each country. Legislation may have an serious impact actually on how the people are empowered to speak up against unsafe practice. For example, in UK, the Nursing and Midwifery Council published a paper in 2013 where actually starting there doing nothing and failing to report concern may bring the concerned nurses to fitness to practice. So really, the nurses are expected to report or challenge any unsafe practice. Now, there are actually a variety of laws in many countries which aimed at helping people to or staff to speak up against unsafe practice. For example, in UK, we have the Public Interest Disclosure Act 1998. In the US, we have the Public Interest Disclosure Act 2002 and the Public Interest Disclosure Act in Australia. However, these kind of legislations, I think they are raising an unrealistic expectation on the newly graduate nurses to speak up when they are not ready or supported to do so. Newly graduate nurses may feel vulnerable or actually less empowered to speak up against their peers who actually wanted to fit into their team in the first place. So our research, one of the implications for that is that newly graduate nurses are in unique position to provide feedback on how their undergraduate nursing education have contributed to their speaking up capabilities as they have now moved in to apply this education in real world setting. We try to answer these questions. What are the newly graduate nurses' views on the contribution of the undergraduate nursing training program in shaping their willingness and ability to speak up against unsafe practice? We've used questionnaire-based survey, cross-sectional survey, collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. This presentation reports on the qualitative finding. The principal investigator had previously used this approach successfully in research involving UK final year nursing students. Now, the data collection tool itself contains several sections. For the quantitative part, it contains demographic data and also contains the 19 items 5-point scale condition of work effectiveness questionnaire, which was developed by Lishinger and her colleagues 2002. And this particular scale aims at assessing the perceived organizational empowerment of the participant. The quantitative part also contains 4 speaking up clinically challenging hypothetical scenario, which will be exposed to the participant. Now, the qualitative part mainly asks 5 questions about challenging and safe practice in broader context, but also have some specific focus on the impact of undergraduate nursing education in shaping the newly graduate nurses' current assertive communication skills. And the newly graduate nurses are asked to reflect on their experience and in their with undergraduate nursing education and how the teaching they've received there or not actually have shaped their current practice. We've used convenient sample of all nurses who actually newly graduated and who are working in 5 publicly funded hospitals in Eastern Province, Saudi Arabia. Around 170 nurses were eligible to participate, and we've given out 140 questionnaires to the selected hospital. Data collection were conducted between February and June 2017, and the questionnaire itself were actually piloted on 6 participants before full-scale survey is carried out. To be eligible to participate, the nurse had to be a newly graduate nurse with 18 months or less of actual hands-on clinical experience, regardless of the time of graduations. The newly graduate nurse had to be graduated from a Saudi university or other Saudi accredited undergraduate nursing education providers. And the newly graduate nurse must have substantive full-time work contract with the hospital setting. To recruit the participant, we've used drop and collect strategy, where research assistant dispatched to the selected hospitals and went around to the targeted ward, and he handed over directly a questionnaire to the eligible nurses. Extra copies of the questionnaire were left over to those nurses who are actually working in the ward but were not physically present at that particular shift. And we've secured the Institute Review Board of Ethical Applications IRB before we started data collection. To analyze the data, data were transferred into Word documents, coded and thematically analyzed using Brown and Clark 6-step thematic analysis. And to ensure the rigor of the data, 3 members of the research team transferred the data into new Word documents, and 2 of the members as well analyzed the themes independently and met to verify the themes and agree the final coding. For the finding, we had an 83 questionnaire completed by the nurses with overall response rate of 60% almost, but only 48 of those questionnaires had a qualitative comment. When it comes to the demographic informations, about 92% of the participants were 30 years old or younger. 96 of them were females, and almost 46 of them were working actually in one particular hospital campus, which is Gamma Hospital. And almost 54% of them actually had 12 months experience or less. And also when it comes to the university where they've done their training, almost 50% of the participants completed their undergraduate nursing training in one particular campus. And the participant came from diverse work setting, medical, surgical, ICU, A&E, with proportionate percentage. And when they asked about if they had any training or on speaking up in their university educations, almost 73% of them said they've received some type of training in how to speak up against unsafe practice. When we analyzed the data, we had 4 major themes: theory-practice gap, quality of undergraduate nursing educations, perceived level of knowledge versus personality, and perceived blurred professional boundaries. For the first themes, the theory-practice gap, many participants suggest that what's been taught in the university in terms of how to speak up or communication skills were actually different from those from the particular practice which they apply in the clinical setting. So one of them said that it cannot be taught because reality environment is different. For the second themes, the quality of undergraduate nursing education, there was an overwhelming view on the lack of exposure to a clinically challenging situation, both in theory and practice, which appeared to have made the participant less skilled in how to exhibit an assertive communication behavior. And also, there was a renewed focus on the poor visibility of assertive communication skills in the undergraduate nursing curriculum. So one of them said that there should be a more subject about unsafe practice and more awareness about it and about the communication itself, its communication skills itself. The third theme is the perceived level of knowledge versus personality. The perceived high level of clinical knowledge was portrayed as a driver for better ability and willingness to speak up. So my undergraduate nursing education supported me by scientific knowledge that makes me confident to speak up against unsafe practice. And also, some of them suggest that speaking up is fundamentally perceived as personality-driven feature. So, if you have a strong personality who is able to speak up against anything before you join nursing training, you're more likely to contribute to continue to do that even after you qualified. So, while for me the speaking up is confident is something at first depends on personality. However, other participants suggest or express more pragmatic approach in balancing both the personality and the knowledge they've received during their training. The fourth theme was the perceived blurred professional boundaries. When asked about what aspects need to be developed in undergraduate nursing training, there was a strong sense of lack of awareness of when, how, and with whom you can and can't speak up. So particularly when the nurses talk about how they protect themselves and to encourage nurses to involve doctor, patient, and caregiver and allow them to find out when to comment on my mistake, for example, seen by her, and allow her to instruct them and teach her proper way. So really, people actually don't know when to speak up and what are the boundaries that they can stop it or they can cross it, for example, and how they react if somebody asks them to speak up or if somebody actually did unsafe practice on their front. They don't know what is the penalty, or how the system actually would protect them as well. Now, theory-practice gap continues to be a major barrier for successful skills acquisitions and application of speaking up behavior among newly graduate nurses. In line with the previous literature, being knowledgeable about the basic and clinical skills was perceived by many nurses as driver for confidence building. Ironically, 72% of the participants said that they have received some type of training in how to speak up, yet there seemed to be lack of tangible confidence building techniques to facilitate the exhibition of more assertive skills. Perception of the role of personality trait appear to occupy a sizable part of some participant view, which may make it more difficult for traditional speaking up teaching strategy to succeed in the future. An awareness of the professional boundaries, scope of practice, and expected role of the nurses and other healthcare professionals appear to have deterred many nurses to speak up. Of course, we've done the study in Saudi Arabia, and we have to be cautious when we transfer the finding into other contexts. Yet there are some lessons learned from this research for wider audience, and the exclusion of more senior nurses and other healthcare professionals have not been, were excluded from this research, which actually, as well as the nature of text writing views, may have reduced the richness of the data obtained from the participant. In conclusion, new graduate nurses are in a unique position to develop effective, sustainable speaking up skills despite several restraining factors. There should be a consensus on what sub-skills and tactics that need to be taught in the undergraduate nursing education to build a confidence-building capacity for nurses. And there needs to be a renewed focus on non-technical skills, including assertive communication skills in both clinical and theory part, to reflect more explicitly the growing needs for such skills in the future. Thank you.